Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, our 2025 Brain Tumor Webinar Series. Today will be, the topic is creating a user-centric neuro-oncology program through the empowerment of patients and providers. We have Dr. Teresa Purzner with us, who's a clinical scientist, neurosurgeon at Queen's University and Kingston Health Sciences Center, as well as Corinne Babalakis, a patient family advisor for the IBTP, as well as clinical trial coordinator for cancer clinical research team. I'll start us off with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Brain Tumor Foundation of Canada is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Arawandran, and Wendat peoples. We honor and respect the history, languages, and culture of the diverse Indigenous people who call this territory home. We move forward with a profound sense of gratitude and respect for the land and its original caretakers, and are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. So welcome everyone. Our webinar series is designed for anyone impacted by a brain tumor. That includes patients, survivors, caregivers, and volunteers, as well as healthcare professionals and researchers seeking to expand their knowledge. Our sessions explore a wide range of topics, including neuro-oncology, neurosurgery, research advancements, psychosocial oncology, mental health, and caregiver support. Just a few housekeeping notes before we start. The webinar will be recorded. The recording will be available post-event on the Brain Tumor Foundation of Canada website. We have dedicated time at the end of the presentation for questions and discussion. Please use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and any resources shared during the webinar will be emailed to all registrants within a week after the event. We're going to start off with some polls that are going to pop up on your screen. If you can fill those in, that would be helpful for us. Thank you. Just take a few moments. All right, thank you, everyone. So let me introduce Dr. Teresa Purzner. Dr. Purzner earned her MD in 2009 and completed 4 years of neurosurgical residency in Toronto before pursuing a PhD in developmental neurobiology at Stanford University. There, she combined mass spectrometry with developmental biology to identify novel therapeutic targets for pediatric brain tumors, leading to the discovery of a new drug target in medulloblastoma. In collaboration with Stanford SPARK and the Pediatric Brain Tumor Consortium, she helped translate this discovery into a first-in-child clinical trial of a CK2 inhibitor. Her work has been recognized with numerous awards, including the Stanford Interdisciplinary Graduate and BioX Fellowship, the annual award of the American Academy of Neurological Surgery, the Weston Havens Foundation Award, the AANS Louise Eisenhardt Award, and the Neurosurgery Research and Education Fellowship. In 2021, she was named one of Canada's top 40 under 40. Dr. Purzner is also the founder of Cerebelly, a science-based baby food company focused on early brain development, now available in over 1,500 stores across North America. Dr. Purzner now runs a neurosurgical practice and translational research lab at Queen's University with her husband, Dr. James Purzner. Together, they focus on advancing care and scientific understanding for patients with brain tumors through integrated clinical and research innovation. I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Purzner.
Thanks, Kate. It's a real pleasure to be here today. As you know, the BTF has been sort of deeply embedded in the brain tumor program that we started here, both in the support and collaboration, but also your resources are part of our resource package. So it's delightful to be here. All right, I'm going to just screen share. Here we go. Okay, does this look okay? Okay, all right.
Yeah, looks good.
Perfect. So I'm going to talk about how we've been taking a very unusual approach to creating a brain tumor program that combines sort of the entrepreneurial background I had in creating Cerebelly, but also some of the academic principles I picked up throughout my scientific career. And the goal of this was to create a very human-centric and adaptive brain tumor program. This came directly from an unmet clinical need. So my research background is basic science, as you mentioned. It's finding new drug targets, creating new drugs, and getting it to humans. And this was very much not that. So this came as a result of me, when I first came to Queen's, realizing that the patients in our area were not doing as well as they could be doing. And similarly, as a physician in our area, to try to get someone from place A to place B took an incredible amount of administrative burden. And so the physicians were doing a lot of work just to achieve standard of care, and the patients weren't doing as well as we had hoped them. So here we see that the patients had a high quality of care. So when you looked at the number of patients coming back after surgery, needing repeat surgeries, or having a mortality in the first 30 days, we were right where we wanted to be, on par with what would be expected. However, when it came to accessing that high quality care, it was a very different story. So we had 27% lower rates of getting MRIs in time. We had 160% higher rates of getting delays to radiation. And then we had a 40% higher 90-day mortality, probably in part reflecting those other stats. And so this was just not acceptable. I started to dig into, why is this happening? Is there one step along their care pathway that's causing inefficiencies and burdens to both the patients and providers? This is the first 4 weeks of a patient's journey when they're diagnosed with a primary brain tumor. And what I was looking for is that one step. But unfortunately, there was no one step. There was no easy fix to this problem. Instead, every step was inefficient. And when there was a pause in one step, all the ensuing steps would then be delayed. And so there was this cumulative time toxicity. And so ultimately, when survival is measured in months, it was clear that every one of these delays matter. It's a complex acute disease, primary brain tumors. And secondly, it was clear that we couldn't fix just any one step. We had to change the entire approach to what we were doing with patient care. The problem is, though, as anyone who has interacted with the healthcare system, it's a very complex hierarchical system. How do you change that in a way that's both widely adopted and sustainable? Well, first, to make change, you have to understand the system and the players that inhabit it. So that's where we started. It's not a simple system, as I'm about to walk you through. So this is a patient's journey when they're first diagnosed with a brain tumor. They present in our region to one of 11 regional hospitals, where they're then seen by one of over 100 emergency physicians. We'll then consult one of 50 regional radiologists who will request an MRI, sometimes requiring the patient to be transferred to a second hospital. Once the MRI is done, they come back to the first hospital where they see a new emerge doc who then consults with a new radiologist. If everything's aligned, they then consult one of 8 regional neurosurgeons who then transfer them to our hospital, where they're seen by one of our 7 frontline care providers and ultimately admitted to the neurosurgical service, where they'll be cared for by one of over 150 different nurses. Every day, the nurse that they see changes, or twice a day. If they're surgical, they're put onto an emerge board. That emerge board is shared by 50 surgeons, and it's overseen by an anesthetist and a charge nurse that changes every 12 hours. As they go up the emerge board, eventually their case will be called. Will be operated on by one of the 8 surgeons, certainly not necessarily the one that admitted them. Post-operatively, their tissue diagnosis will be performed by a single neuropathologist, Dr. Oster. They'll be readmitted again under the care of one of the 150 nurses. Ultimately, they'll get a post-op MRI, and they will be one of 7,000 new patient referrals to our cancer center. And so you can see it's a really complex system, and this isn't the whole system. There's a lot of other key players: physiotherapy, palliative care, discharge coordinators, ward clerks, spiritual care, psychosocial oncology. And you might say, okay, well, there are a lot of people, but are these really the source of future innovation and efficiency? And the answer is yes. In fact, one of the earliest things we noticed was that the ward clerk for the cancer center would receive referrals from us. And if they were not within our catchment, but affiliated with a different hospital, sometimes that referral would be rejected and then just faxed back to the floor, where that fax would get lost to the system. And so we would never know that a referral had been rejected. So it actually does matter. Making things even more complex is that we have a very large geographic catchment. It's not like the GTA, where a hospital has just a very small region from which they pull. Ours is over 16,000 square kilometers, and we serve a predominantly rural population. And so when we say we can't fix any one step, we need to change our entire approach, this becomes pretty daunting. It's quite a complex system. And so, how do we capture valuable feedback throughout each stage of the process, given how many people are involved and how geographically dispersed they are? Even if we are able to capture valuable feedback, how do we distill what truly matters from the overwhelming volume of information? How do we make it that the loudest person in the room isn't the one that influences the system the most, but that we have a systematic approach to getting the core issues? And even if we're able to do that, even if we're able to distill the core issues, how do we design targeted interventions that will be broadly and sustainable adopted in a system that's running on fumes? And it really is. Everyone's doing their best, and we have more obligations than we have time to fulfill the way that we would like. What I can say is that a solution that does not work is taking your data, going to overworked healthcare workers and saying, look at my data, change what you're doing. It's not well received. It doesn't create sustainable impact, let's say. And so that couldn't be our approach. So then what is our approach? And when I really thought about this, I took a step back, because it did seem quite daunting. And I thought, well, I'm not the first person to want to change a system. Who else does this well? And actually what inspired me was not my very long academic career, but it was my experience at Cerebelly in a startup. So, if I wanted to make a new baby food that sort of reinvents the way we think about feeding our child to support early brain development, I had to hit a huge number of parents who have well-ingrained ideas of what it means to feed their child, and then provide them a product that was so valuable to them that they were willing to change their way. And to me, this was more in line, the startup entrepreneurial mentality was more in line with what the problem was here than traditional academic approaches. And so I thought, what if we take the strength of academia? So academia is very good at identifying, describing problems, but then marry it with the ethos of startups. So startups are very good at solving problems efficiently and effectively. And let's put them together. Let's harness the rigor of academia and the efficiency and accountability of a startup, and let's create a program with that approach. And so the approach I use is called design thinking. It's kind of the opposite of the scientific method. In the scientific method, you come up with a hypothesis, you test it, and you publish whatever your results are. In design thinking, you do the opposite. You start off with the solution with no preconceived notion of what that solution should be. You then go to the users and you prototype and you test. So let me give you a concrete example, because it's kind of hard to understand the difference when you first are introduced to it. Let's say you want to create a travel app that's tailored towards families that are traveling. You say, I'm going to create a travel app with a toggle that says I'm traveling with kids. You go give it to a bunch of parents. You see if it improved their experience. Maybe it improved at 20%. And then you can either publish those results or create an app. With design thinking, you say, I want to make the best possible travel app for families. And I have no idea what that looks like. I have no preconceived notion of what that should look like. You then go and you talk to many, many families who travel, and you say, well, what does that look like? And they say, well, maybe I want to know if a restaurant has a child's menu. Maybe I want to know if a hotel has a crib, or if a car company has child seats. Then based on their feedback, you prototype the app, and then you go and test it. And it's circuitous. So when you test it, you take it back to the family, see how do they do, and you go around and around and around, and it just keeps going. And so what you get is a very solution-focused, rapidly adaptive, and human-centric solution. And the last is the most important fundamental part of the design thinking, is this human-centric approach. And so I thought, what if we took the same approach, but instead of a travel app, we'll create a world-class neuro-oncology program. And what this is, it doesn't just involve patients and providers, it really puts them in the seat. And you tell them, okay, I'm going to build a car. What does that car look like? It's that entrepreneurial, customer-obsessed attitude that is fundamental to success in the early days, especially. That's what we did. We started with the empathize step. This is how do we capture valuable feedback and distill the most important parts. In the startup world, that's typically primary and secondary market research. Primary market research is talking to the people who will actually be using your products, things like focus groups, surveys, observation. It's directly relevant, very valuable information, but it's extremely costly, both in times and resources. And then there's secondary market research. So this is looking at published market stats, government statistics, company websites, industry associations. So it's indirect data, but you get a whole bunch of data for not too much money and time. We did this, but with an academic spin. We started off with a retrospective review where we looked at the pathway and the care of over 1,500 patients. We then did focus groups with surgeons and medical radiation oncologists. And then we did 42 semi-structured qualitative interviews. So there were interviews that were a little bit structured that we recorded, and it was with everyone from nursing to allied health, and then a good deal of patients and their family members. We did secondary market research. We looked at lit search. We looked at best-in-class programs. We looked at databases, and we looked at programs who were doing a good job at Queen's already. So that would be the lung and the colorectal and the breast program were doing a good job. So how were they navigating our specific system? A few observations. I won't go into many. This was probably the most pronounced one that came up again and again, is that patients in our catchment who came from small towns did worse than patients who came from large towns, significantly worse. Interestingly, being far away was not the same risk factor. So it's not just because you're far away that you did worse. So it's something specific about being from a smaller town. So a person from a small town close to Kingston did worse than someone from a large town very far, like Peterborough, which is on the extent of our catchment. In the interviews, we had 3 positive themes. One was very good inpatient palliative support, provider dedication and care, and communication between providers within the hospital. And then we had 4 areas of improvement. So standardization, education, communication, and innovation were things that we could do better. We then went on to define the program based on that empathize step. Our original scope was just to improve flow of care, 30 and 90-day survivals. These are the provincial metrics that we're graded by. But after this empathize stage, what we wanted to do is quite a bit more. Things like early and consistent education, having a single touch point throughout the journey, earlier referrals to palliative care, psychosocial oncology, and also to Indigenous navigator, and then innovation again. We went on to ideate. So we've defined what we do. Now, how are we going to do it? Again, we came up with this very entrepreneurial approach. We came up with a vision, so to provide the highest level of care, irrespective of who you are or where you are. So the other part came from that empathize stage to reflect the rurality component. We came up with a mission, and we came up with values. So collaborative, equitable, data-driven, and user-centric. We came up with branding. So this is our original logo. It was the Queen's Brain Tumor Program. And then we create the structure of the company itself. So there was the brain tumor program itself, and we had 3 subunits. So the clinical care, clinical innovation, and then public outreach and awareness. We branded each of them, and then we created these high performance teams around each. And I'll just say, this was all done off of $50,000 seed grants. And so these are all volunteers. Every person here volunteered their time to help with this. And that's very inspiring and unique to healthcare and academia, actually. We came up with our action items: patient and family support, clinical care, research and innovation, administration, operational efficiency, and outreach and awareness. And then we went on to prototype. So we knew who we were, we knew what we wanted to do, we had a structure and how we were going to manage it, but what are we actually going to do? What is the intervention? We did things like educational brochures that we give to each patient. So I'll just bring your attention to the side panel here, where it's the treatment timeline. It tells patients what they should expect when, and then who to reach out to if it's not happening. We found, particularly with our rural patients, they didn't always advocate for themselves very hard. They had a bit of an attitude that if I haven't heard from the doctor, then maybe I shouldn't have heard from the doctor, when sometimes they didn't hear from us purely because they got lost. And so with this brochure, we would sit down with them and say, here are the timelines. We have a lot of patients, things get lost. You are doing us a big favor by letting us know when you haven't reached that timeline so that we can advocate for you. And so it empowered the patient to advocate for the care in a way that felt like they were also contributing to the system, which they absolutely were. We created standardized referrals. We had assessment tools and surveys to see how we were doing. And the most important intervention by far was bringing on our amazing navigator, Dana. She's just wonderful. She's our single touch point. And with her came access to an email address and a phone number. And so there's now this single person, when they're seeing all these dozens of different people, there's this one person that's always their touch point. We came up with Dana, we came up with our milestones that she can then track to make sure people are meeting their milestones. We did brand awareness, again, a very entrepreneurial approach. So we created a website, we have social media, and then we engage quite a bit with traditional media as well. And then we created these introductory bags. So after each patient with a brain tumor has surgery, Dana, our amazing navigator, will sit down with them for a really good long session. It can be up to an hour where she sits down, she goes over the educational materials. You can see here the BTF handbooks. So we didn't have to do anything there because the BTF had already done it better than we would be able to. But every single one of our patients gets a BTF handbook and a caregiver handbook. Information about how to get to the cancer center, how to stay here when you do get here, all of our assessment tools so that as soon as she's done that sit down, immediately the referrals go out. So there's no risk of losing a referral or not having that referral sent. And then it all comes in a branded bag with a notebook because it's nice to keep track of what's going down. And then a toque or a baseball cap in the summer because we shave the hair sometimes. And so something to cover it up and keep your head warm on the way home. This is our amazing patient working group. So we have, I think, one of the great pleasures of doing this has been working with patient survivors and their family members. This is Katerina and Corinne. Corinne will talk to you later. One of the initiatives that they took on, which is so impressive, is they came up with Kingston's Brain Tumor Week. So it started off with the BTF walk, and it ended with a football game. That raised funds, and so it was very exciting and successful and inspiring week. And I think I heard that we actually had the largest fundraising amount for a walk, so for the BTF. So something to be very proud of. They also created this, which I love. It's the IBTP Partners. So it's community partners who give reduced rates for food and lodging when patients are undergoing 6 weeks of radiation. And so something we found for our rural patients when they came, just the cost of coming here and staying here and eating was quite substantial. And it was something that was taking up space in their mind when their mind should really be focusing on their health and recovery. And so Katerina and Corinne and our amazing student group went out and they found these different local businesses willing to alleviate some of that burden, which is just another beautiful way for the community to come together for these patients. We're working closely with our Indigenous group. We're creating resources and awareness, both for our Indigenous patients, but also for our healthcare providers so they can become aware of what resources we have available for Indigenous patients. And actually, I think most of the education was the latter. It was telling other providers what's out there so they're aware that they can offer it. And then, of course, we had this wonderful retreat where patients, providers, everybody came together for a wonderful evening of good food and good presentations where we went over basically what are the prototypes, what are we going to do, what are we getting wrong, and how do we make it just right before launching it. Came up with our key performance indexes, again, something that could be, I wish was more presence in academia and healthcare, particularly healthcare, but is front and center in most corporate endeavors and entrepreneurship. It's what are we grading ourselves on at the end of the year to see if we've accomplished what we want. And then finally, we tested it. So we launched it like a company. We went out to all the referring hospitals, introduced them to the program, gave them resources on how to refer patients to us, and then resources for the patients themselves so that the first touch point for a patient with a brain tumor program actually happens before they even get to Queens. Here's how we did. So if you remember, our MRI stats were pretty bad. Here we are after the IBTP intervention. So we're now actually, the most recently, we're at 100%, which makes us, we went from one of the worst to the best in the province. Here you can just see the time until they get the MRI. So the blue line is after we did our intervention, whereas most patients are getting their MRIs very, very early on. Here's radiation within 6 weeks. So you can see here we were outliers, and then now we're back straight where we want to be at provincial averages. Here's number of patients getting surgery in time. So in F23, in fiscal year 23, it was 50%, and now we're up to 93%. So quite an improvement. And then here's our 90-day mortality. And I have to admit, I didn't think this was going to change. I thought our timeline would change, but I didn't think mortality would change because it's so very, very hard to make a dent in mortality with glioblastoma. But here we had 26% 90-day mortality before intervention. Now we're down 18%. So that's really phenomenal. Anyone who has had this disease or looked into this disease knows how hard it is to move the needle on it. Something I'm very, very proud of is that the gap between our rural and urban patients went away post-intervention. And so before it was 28% versus 21% mortality. And now you can see actually it's 16.7 versus 20. So a non-significant trend, but where rural patients are actually doing better than the urban patients. They're not, it's not statistically significant. They're doing similarly, but at least the trend is in the direction that we wanted. I really want to highlight this because this happened before we did any of the interventions that were focused on rural patients, things like the patient program. So it really shows that rural patients were asymmetrically affected by inefficient care. And by creating efficiency, we created equity, not by doing specific things just for the patient population that was equity seeking, but just by making the whole thing better, we were able to take away that asymmetric cost that our rural patients were facing. And here is the 1-year survival. Again, you can see urban versus rural, pre versus post. We've really taken away that gap. So I found that really surprising, actually. I thought we would have to do more things that were focused on the specific population. I'm often asked, why did this work? Because nothing works. And honestly, it worked better than I thought it was going to work. But what I would say is that I think it worked because of the way we ingrained both providers and patients, both. It has to be both the providers and the customer, basically, which is the patient. We embedded them in every single step of the design process. It ensures that we're meeting actual versus perceived needs. I can't tell you how often, as a physician, something is done to make my life better, and it just makes it more difficult. In this way, because it is the physicians who are dictating their specific part of the care bubble, it means that we're actually addressing things that they think are problems, not that we have assumed are problems for them. It ensures the solutions are feasible, because if they're not, then the person in the room would speak up and say, no, this is going to make life harder. And then it promotes widespread adoption, because if you have someone at every step that's already bought into it and who's a bit of a leader of the field, then people will see that as sort of a stamp of approval. And so it will also promote widespread adoption as well. And so I can't emphasize enough how important it was to have both the patients and the providers in the room at every critical step to make sure that we're making people's life easier and we're actually addressing what people want us to address. I'll just finish by quickly talking about the fact that a well-structured clinical program is the foundation for academic innovation. Innovation and access to innovation kept coming up as a want. This is what patients originally had. They were identified, went to the OR, got pathological diagnosis, and went on to adjuvant therapy, chemotherapy, and radiation. And this is what happens now. So when they're ID'd, they are consented for tissue. We're a Marathon of Hope Center for INI sometimes, and then for surgical clinical trials. They're also enter into a tracker that the navigator uses to make sure they're hitting their milestones. At the time, whoops, went backwards. At the time of the OR, we collect tissue for tumor banking, fresh and frozen. We create personalized organoid lines. We send it out for Marathon of Hope sequencing. Post-operatively, they meet the navigator. All their baseline clinical, radiographic, sociodemographic, and variables are recorded, and they're consented for clinical epidemiological research. And then there's a check-in at 30 days, at 90 days, and then finally progression-free survival and overall survival are recorded. And when you have something like this, here's all the different, here's their care pathway, here's the research and innovation touch points, here's the navigator touch points, here's the clinical milestones, and here's all the resources. When you have something that's so embedded like this, it is just a nidus for innovation. And so here are all the different projects that have been established since the initiation of the brain tumor program. And we've been fortunate enough now to have gotten a good amount of funding, both from the Canadian Cancer Society and from Marathon of Hope, to do both the clinical and the basic science aspects of this. And so very appreciative. The last thing I'll say is that we've rebranded from the Queen's Brain Tumor Program to the Integrated Brain Tumor Program at Queen's. And the reason for that is that we're expanding to different sites, both regionally and internationally. And most recently, we're actually expanding to new diseases as well. So we'll be starting a colorectal program here at Queen's as well, using similar methodology. Big thanks to my fellow neurosurgeons. This is not possible without their buy-in and their enthusiasm. So extremely appreciative of that. And then these are some of the health, some of the leaders. So the head of surgery, Dr. Walker, Dr. Rudan's the head of research for DOS. And then Fabio and Andrew are the radiation medical oncologists. And then Laura has helped a lot with advocating for our navigator. Here's our incredible students who always deserve the most recognition, and you can see we have a fun time together as a lab. And then finally, and most importantly, major thanks to our patient working group members, Katerina and Corinne, who have just been such an incredible source of inspiration and enthusiasm and joy, and just are powerhouse workers as well. So it's been a great deal of fun working with them. And we are actually lucky enough to have one of them here. So we have Corinne here with us today, who will talk a little bit about her experience on the other side of this. So the person who was actually giving the insight and the inspiration. All right, I will stop sharing, Corinne, to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for your excellent presentation and for your lovely acknowledgement. It truly is such an honor and a privilege to work with you and your incredible team at the IBTP. And I particularly work as a patient family advisor. So my connection to the IBTP is based on my lived experience as a primary caregiver for my mom, Annette, who unfortunately passed away from glioblastoma in March of 2023. And then for those who don't know, glioblastoma is the most common and the most aggressive primary brain cancer. So my first contact with the IBTP was actually in March of 2024. So that was the year mark of my mom's passing. And I really wanted to do something to honor my mom. So I reached out to Dr. Purzner at 10 o'clock at night to propose a community initiative to support patients with glioblastoma and their families as a way to honor my mom. And so my very rough, overzealous ideas, which needed a lot of help, quickly turned into a flurry of emails back and forth that evening over the next few days, weeks, months, etc. Then it turned into practical meetings where we discussed very kind of realistic targets and timelines. And it turned into connections with Dr. Purzner's brilliant team, and most notably for the community initiative that Dr. Purzner was talking about earlier. Katerina Macedo has just been an invaluable resource that's well known to the Brain Tumor Foundation with just her tremendous work that she does with all the brain tumor initiatives. And ultimately, this all led to a successful community initiative, that Brain Tumor Awareness Week and all of the events that took place. And so a main driver, I believe, of the IPTP's just tremendous success has been Dr. Purzner's outstanding ability to meaningfully engage patients and their families in the co-creation and co-implementation of the IPTP. And it's through her exemplary leadership and innovative application of this design thinking approach. So I think that Dr. Purzner has achieved this through her authentic, consistent, and continuous inclusion of patients and their families. So from the very beginning of the IBTP, Dr. Purzner has ensured that she has genuinely included us, patients and caregivers, etc., as much as possible and as meaningfully as possible. So this includes in formal settings and meetings, informal settings and meetings, emails, retreats, events, just anything and everything. Anytime she can include us and acknowledge us and connect us, she does. She truly does. And it's such a privilege. I personally am thrilled to have been included in many amazing opportunities. Some of these include as a collaborator on several grants, including a Canadian Cancer Society grant and a current CIHR grant application we're working on at the moment. As a moderator for a Queen's University St. Clair Cancer Research Institute brain cancer session, as an advisor on national fitness to drive brain tumor guidelines, and also as an advisor on different manuscripts and program materials, all sorts of things really. So just in general, from the sort of caregiver perspective and representing my mom, no one truly understands the indescribable trauma and overwhelming challenges that are associated with glioblastoma and navigating its care. And I have just truly found that Dr. Purzner values these insights, and she just has this amazing ability to mobilize this knowledge and turn it into action. She's an excellent executor and a quick one. And we've truly been included from the beginning at all stages in the creation, implementation, and ongoing reevaluation of the IBTP program and its operations. She is truly a charismatic and humble leader who creates these environments where you truly feel seen and heard. And she always encourages everyone to contribute if they're comfortable. And she always has this way of ensuring that we know how our contributions have been included in all sorts of different ways for the program. And I think that's what also helps to, enrich our experience and foster this ongoing engagement that ultimately leads to the continued success of the program. So thank you. I'm so grateful to be a part of this extraordinary team, and thank you so much for your time.
That was so nice. Thanks, Corinne.
You're so welcome. It's so true.
Yeah. Well, this is why it's so wonderful to work together. It's just energizing, I think, on both sides. Yeah.
100%.
Thank you so much. That was really incredible. Taking on the healthcare system is a challenging to improve it. It can be quite challenging, and having worked in the system for a long time and trying to work to improve things, it's impressive the outcomes that you've had with this program. What really struck me too is when you said when survival is measured in months, every delay matters, and I really like that. That really stuck with me. The first question I had actually was, I noticed you mentioned that the rural patients didn't do as well, and that improving the program overall seemed to improve it for them. But do you know what factors might have affected the rural patients over the urban patients?
That's a really good question. And it's one we've really dug into a lot. And I don't have a satisfying answer to it, to be honest. We looked at, are they older? Are they less healthy? Is there anything we can link? And we have not been able to link anything data driven to why they were doing worse. And similarly, there's anecdotal experiences where it does seem that in general they're more accepting of delays. But I don't know, right? Because that also then puts it a little bit on them as well. And while that might be an anecdotal experience, I don't know if that's enough to really explain it. So I'm not sure. I'm really glad that the gap disappeared, because I've been sort of losing sleep over, if it doesn't, then what am I going to do next? I haven't figured out the core source of the problem yet. And probably a lot of it would be even more conversations. We've spoken to a lot of the local leaders to try to get their thoughts on it as well. And the answer is I don't really know why they were doing less well. And if the gap hadn't closed, it would have required a lot more of that empathize step to dig in even deeper, because whatever the difference was, it's not a quantifiable difference. It's going to be a qualitative difference, and that would, requires more conversations. But it's an excellent question, and one that we have spent countless hours trying to get a good answer to.
Fair, thank you. One of the questions that had come through was, are there any promising breakthroughs or trends that you're currently observing?
Do we mean in terms of promising new therapies, or do we think?
I would, I think that
Yeah,
would be.
I would say the big breakthrough, the glioblastoma has been very, very hard to make progress on. If you look at the actual, median survival, 5-year survival, there hasn't been a huge change in decades, to be honest. But where there has been a lot of movement lately that's really exciting is in the lower grade primary tumors. So before you're a full glioblastoma, everything kind of leading up to that. And there's a new drug called vorasidenib. It's a series of drugs that are similar, but vorasidenib was the first that kind of got through the door. That is showing really exciting results in terms of being able to delay the time between surgery when you then have to go on to get adjuvant therapy, and like very, very meaningful. And so that has been hugely exciting to the field. With glioblastoma, there's so much active research as well. So we're all waiting for the equivalent thing to happen with glioblastoma. But for lower grade tumors, it's been a total game changer, and it's been great to see that translation happen.
Great, thank you. And I noticed that you have a navigator that follows all of the patients. How long does the navigator follow the individual in the program for, like on an amount of timeline?
Yeah, so she follows them for 90 days, and she's basically the link between surgery and when they enter the cancer center. So we found that once patients were in the cancer center, there was this very nice structure and a huge amount of resources, actually, whether it's psychosocial oncology, they have their own navigators. They have residents and fellows and this and that. Where the big gap was in bridging that time of surgery to that time of first receiving radiation. And then once they received it, things went pretty smoothly. And so that should happen within 6 weeks, initiation of radiation from the time of surgery. And so they're followed by the navigator up until the initiation of radiation. And then she checks in again at 90 days to make sure that everything has gone smoothly. She also captures the patients that do not choose to go on to get chemotherapy and radiation. And so this is a patient population that is really lost to the system, actually. Our metrics reflect people who choose to take every therapeutic option available, and our processes reflect the same thing. Our processes reflect efficiently shuffling someone from point A to point B. What they really miss out on, and interestingly, this was made the most clear to me by my interactions with our local Indigenous leaders and our Indigenous communities. And I remember the conversation, it was one of our first conversations where they said, okay, well, this is great. I see how quickly you're moving them through. But what if they don't want that? What happens then? And I came to realize that there was no process, there was no support structure, there was no plan B for anyone who said no at any step. And so that's something we're trying to integrate even better into the next round of our design thinking that we're starting in November, is how do we create a similarly accountable structure for people who don't choose to take every single step in the care pathway. And so that'll kind of fall under our umbrella as well, our patients who do not choose to go on to get adjuvant therapy.
Amazing. What would you say is the most surprising thing that you found in developing this project?
I was really surprised at how different the perceived priorities were between healthcare workers and patients and their families.
Oh, interesting.
It was what we think patients want. I mean, there's some things that are universal. Everyone wants high quality care. They want access to the best possible. They want safe surgeries and this and that. And so, there's table stakes, right? There's things that everyone wants. But as soon as you get outside of that, what was really important and meaningful to families was very, very different than what physicians assumed was important to families and their caregivers. And so that was the first most surprising thing was that it really took me by surprise. I knew there would be differences, but there's a chasm. And then I guess the second thing was the improvement in mortality. I didn't think that we would have an improvement in mortality, let alone such a huge one. And so that was quite surprising, actually, that we were able to improve mortality.
Okay. The next question we have is, if you could wave a magic wand and take the IBTP to the next step, what would that look like and what would you need?
Yeah, I think the IBTP at Queen's is going to evolve exactly the way it should. It's the way that the patients and providers tell us to every year by improving things. But I think what we need to do is we need to expand at least the methodology or the concept of this extremely customer obsessed, iterative, human centric approach to improving healthcare, where we don't come in with this very paternalistic perspective of like, here is my hypothesis of what is good for you. I will test it and see if it works. But instead, starting with that solution and starting with the idea of like, what is the best possible thing? And we have to engage with people to get that answer. And so that's what we're trying to do with these grants that we're writing, is trying to get funding to, we're going to start small. So we're starting with Health Sciences North in Sudbury because they're very similar to us, same provincial healthcare plans, similar catchment, similar split between rural and urban. Just to see, okay, if we take it to somewhere very similar, how does that look? And then we're taking it to colorectal cancer. There's no reason it has to be brain, right? It's the process is what it is, and see, okay, the colorectal program here is really strong. It's led by excellent clinician scientists. And so in the hands of someone who is so effective, how does that work when you're at the same center, the same site, but now in a different disease? And then based on that learning, we're going to create a kit, basically, a kit that is the blueprint on how other people can do it. And then people can then use that as a resource to try it themselves. It is hard, though, because the entrepreneurial mind frame is something that is best learned through experience. And there's not a whole lot of, successful startup CEOs who are looking to help nonprofit, healthcare programs. And so there's a resource challenge to it and a time challenge. But if I had a magic wand, it would be that. It would be engaging more of these really exceptional entrepreneurs, pairing them up with centers, with our little our kits, our toolkit, and have them work together to really efficiently create solutions that people want. So that would be my dream.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us for the webinar.